has told you, my spirit name is Silver Thunderbird Woman. I do attend services at St. Matthew's on the Plains in Burlington, but I was born in Chapleau, Ontario, in the northern part of our province. And I am a member of the Chapleau Cree First Nation. And while I've spent most of my adult life down here in this area, I still hold the North as home. I was raised in a small, semi-remote community. The reserve that I am associated with did not exist when I was born. That's part of the story that's going to be woven into what I will speak to you about today. But although not born on the reserve, it is part of my heritage. My community sits on the rivers flowing into James Bay, the place my Indigenous roots come from. This is Treaty 9 territory, rich in natural resources, and although I am sure I am biased, I have to say, stunning in its beauty. In the words of a well-known song, all of my memories are there. But I have just a few minutes to share with you what I experienced, or some of what I experienced growing up as an Indigenous person in this small remote area. And I guess the first thing to know up front is that I wasn't even able to be identified as an Indigenous person. The gist of the story is basically is that part of my life and that part of life for my family, for the most part, had to be as hidden as possible. My maternal grandfather was a full-blooded Cree Indian, born in Moose Factory, Ontario. Unknown to me when I was growing up, he was also a survivor, along with one of his brothers, of a residential school that was in Sault Ste. Marie. My paternal grandfather was also Cree, as was my paternal grandmother, both born in Treaty 9 territory up on the Bay. Recent documentation has shown that my maternal grandmother, although it was strongly denied in her life, also had some Indigenous blood. And this is part of the history that I refer to. So saying that, you might think that I have a very strong sense of who I am as an Indigenous person. But sadly, that's not really the case. I've learned and I've grown, and I think I have gained some wisdom over the years, but I'll share a bit of that story with you. What I know for sure is that my family felt shame. It was understood that it was in no one's best interest to admit this heritage. This led to some difficult days and stressful times. As a means of survival, we found ways to hide it as much as possible or deny it, and sometimes take whatever steps necessary to be able to survive in the world that we were living in. My grandfathers, both of them, had gone through what is known as the disenfranchisement. This means, and this is very much related to the Indian Act, but they gave up their rights in order to be able to make a living and care for their families. Not because they wanted to, but because it was seen as the only way to try and survive. And when I say give up their rights, what I'm referring to as well is they actually had to give up their status as Indians. So they became, according to the government, non-Indians. If they had held on to their status as Indians, they could not vote, they could not enter stores, they could not own land, they were not acknowledged if they used their language, and the prospect of holding any type of meaningful job was minimal. So to help frame the circumstances, I'll give you a brief synopsis of what happened to the Chapleau Cree people. Part of our history is that the James Bay Cree used to travel the waters of the Arctic watershed. Traveling from James Bay area down through the waterways, portaging and canoeing. They did this on a journey to Chapleau to trade their furs. This was an arduous journey, even for the hardy people that they were. Once they reached that area, the group often remained near Chapleau for a time, continuing their continual traditional harvesting lifestyle. Time and circumstances soon changed, though. Through the treaty process that was going on, treaties were being signed over several years right across the country, and certainly the Treaty 9 territory was part of that history. So Indian Band number 75 was set aside for this group. This was in 1905 at the signing of Treaty number 9. So to make a long story short, there is much history there, but the land and the water allotted to the Chapleau Cree, this area of land that they were trying to inhabit while trading their furs was in actual fact, partly, largely, swampland. They were never actually able to stay on this piece of land permanently. It was uninhabitable. And although they tried to survive there, as it was all that was allotted for them, they could not. And when it became clear that this was not an area that they could stay on, they scattered. Some of them moved into the town of Chapleau, which was very nearby. And some of them just scattered completely, going different places across the country. So moving right ahead to 1985, walking through a lot of that history right now, which there's no time to really delve into. But if I bring you back up to 1985, this is the point at which we were able to reclaim a piece of land that became helpful and useful for us to live on. So after a long, hard-fought battle with the Canadian government, as well as the commitment of several hard-working people, land studies that were done, treaty land searches, and much more, the Fox Lake Reserve, new home of the Chapleau Cree, came into existence. A new reserve was built, approximately 1.5 kilometers from the town of Chapleau. It is situated on beautiful land beside clear, unpolluted water. This is as the treaty had stated it needed to be. Many of our people came home, and they have reconnected with their roots and built their life there. I have been able to travel home many times and have at one point spent a period of time working there. How did it feel to grow up Indigenous with strong roots linked to this group? Well, there was an unspoken but well understood knowledge that you did not talk about who you were as an Indigenous person. You tried not to acknowledge it. Both my mother and my father's family have their roots with this group of people. Their fathers trapped, hunted, fished on the original land and tried to provide for their families there. Circumstances were too harsh, thus the move into town. Survival became linked to the ability to assimilate. As much as it was not spoken about, it was well known who we were and where we had come from. For the most part, easygoing in nature, a good sense of humor, and the necessity to try, an awareness of the necessity to try and make it work. This is what took precedence. In my memory, on a beautiful sunny day, as a child of about 8, I walked through the door of my family home from a day of school. This was pre-reserve days. We were living in the town of Chapleau, trying to pretend that we were not Indigenous. My mother met me at the front door. In a hushed, whispering voice, she said, come in, I have Bannock. What a treat for after school. But why the whispering? I looked around, thinking there must be somebody there who she hadn't told me about. No one was seen. No explanation was given. But somewhere deep inside, I knew. We lived on the edge of town. There was no one around that was going to see, hear, or smell anything that was happening. Why the hush hush? It was shameful. It was shameful to be having something that was considered traditional Indian food. She wanted no one to know that we were going to enjoy a traditional piece of bannock bread. There was shame in that. These things were hidden. No traditional food was talked about, even if eaten. No native language was taught or openly used. No ceremonies were allowed to take place. Anything that connected us to who we were was shunned. Only things of the non-Indigenous world were what we were told that we could pursue. I spent a great deal of my time trying to process all of this and trying my best to understand it all. Some of the stories I heard were that as a young girl, my mother was made to wear a broad-brimmed hat anytime she went out in the sun to prevent her skin color from getting any darker. Everyone just accepted these things. In many cases, these were the rules that we set up and imposed upon ourselves because the need to deny and assimilate was so strong. At the time, I believe it was done to try and protect the younger ones so that they would not have to endure some of the things that their elders had had to. Through some behaviors of my elders, I learned just what a negative thing it was to let yourself adopt any Indigenous ways, sometimes just in very simple acts. I recall my grandfather at the dinner table making a simple request, such as pass the salt, please. He said it in Cree. My grandmother, who never in any way acknowledged an Indigenous heritage, literally turned away from him at the table and remained silent. Nothing was passed, and I certainly knew that it was not my place to step in and pass the salt at that point. Nothing was passed until he spoke English. Once he did, he received what he had asked for. The need to assimilate was so strong that family often pushed against family to make sure the unspoken rules were adhered to. The little girl who sat at those tables heard the stories, watched the behaviors, and tried hard to figure out just who she was. I have spent my adult life on a journey that has involved most certainly my own truth and reconciliation. I have done this for my children, my grandchildren, and for myself, but also for anyone else who seeks to understand. I am a very proud member of the Chapleau Cree First Nation. I grew up in this church, our Anglican church. I have no desire to turn from that and never have. Several years ago, I connected with the spiritual side of myself in a new place, the Indigenous ceremonies. This has led me to a much greater acceptance and understanding of my roots. I have felt the shame. I have sat with survivors of residential schools, experienced and heard their stories. I have had my breath taken away with the ache and the pain expressed for all that was denied and for all that was endured. I have danced the Sundance ceremony for the healing of myself and for the healing of our people. and as part of a commitment to my own spiritual journey. There are more stories I could tell, but perhaps another time. I am Janice. I am Silver Thunderbird woman, Indigenous, and a member of this dearly loved Anglican church. As a strong Indigenous child of the Creator, blessed with many wonderful teachers who have helped me understand my history. I believe very much in the Truth and Reconciliation and its 94 recommendations. I say miigwech to each of you. Thank you for allowing me to share this story with you on this special day. Miigwech.
Janice, on behalf of all of us, I just want to say we are deeply privileged and honored to have had you share your story with us, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you very much.